October 1945. In a military intelligence office in Washington, D.C., a translator named Helen Yamamoto was handed a confiscated diary recovered from a Japanese prisoner of war camp in California. The diary had been written in careful Japanese script by a 27-year-old nurse named Sachiko Tanaka, who had been captured in the final weeks of the war. Intelligence officers wanted the diary translated immediately, convinced it might contain military secrets, coded messages, or evidence of espionage activities. But what Helen discovered as she began translating the pages was something far more profound and unexpected. The diary was not filled with military intelligence or propaganda. It was filled with the observations of a woman who had been taught her entire life to see Americans as demons, as barbaric enemies without mercy or compassion. And every single page documented her growing realization that everything she had been told was a lie. Before we reveal what this secret diary exposed about the truth of American treatment of prisoners and how it changed the course of one woman's understanding of her enemy, tell us where you are watching from in the comments below. Sachiko Tanaka had been born in Hiroshima in 1918. She had grown up in a traditional Japanese family, her father a civil servant, her mother a homemaker who embodied the values of duty, honor, and sacrifice that defined pre-war Japanese culture. Sachiko had been a quiet, studious child, with a gift for science and medicine. She had attended nursing school in Tokyo, graduating in 1938 just as Japan was deepening its military expansion across Asia. She had joined the Imperial Japanese Army Nursing Corps, not out of militaristic fervor, but out of a sense of duty. In Japanese culture, serving one's country was not optional. It was expected. It was part of what defined a person as honorable and worthy. She had believed the propaganda about Japan's sacred mission to bring order and civilization to Asia. She had believed that America was Japan's enemy, a nation of racist imperialists who wanted to destroy Japanese culture and enslave the Japanese people. When the war turned against Japan and she found herself stationed at a field hospital in the Philippines, she had seen the devastating consequences of modern warfare. She had treated Japanese soldiers with horrific wounds. She had watched young men die despite her best efforts. She had worked 20-hour shifts with inadequate supplies and no hope of reinforcement or relief. When American forces had advanced through the Philippines, she had expected to die. Japanese soldiers and medical personnel had been told repeatedly that Americans took no prisoners, that capture meant torture and execution, that it was better to die by one's own hand than to fall into enemy hands. Some of her fellow nurses had committed suicide rather than face capture. Sachiko had not. She had been too exhausted, too numb, too worn down by the relentless horror of war to even consider it. When American soldiers had stormed the field hospital, she had stood frozen, waiting for the bullet or the bayonet that would end her life. Instead, an American medic, a young man with red hair and freckles who looked barely old enough to be out of high school, had asked her in broken Japanese if she was injured. He had treated her with professional courtesy. He had not hurt her. He had not threatened her. He had simply processed her as a prisoner of war and arranged for her transport to a holding facility. The confusion she felt in that moment was the first crack in the propaganda wall that had been built around her mind her entire life. If Americans were barbaric monsters, why had this young medic shown her basic human decency? If Americans hated all Japanese people and wanted them dead, why had he bothered to ask if she needed medical attention? She had been transported to a prisoner of war camp in California, a facility that had been established to house Japanese prisoners, both military personnel and civilians who had been caught up in the final stages of the war. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. It was clearly a prison, but it was not the torture chamber she had been led to expect. On her first night in the camp, lying on a thin but clean mattress in a barracks that was basic but adequate, Sachiko had made a decision. She would document everything she observed. She would write down her experiences in a diary that she would hide from the American guards, not because she planned to use it for intelligence purposes, but because she needed to process what was happening to her, needed to make sense of the cognitive dissonance between what she had been taught and what she was experiencing. She had obtained a small notebook from another prisoner who had managed to keep personal possessions through the chaos of capture. She had begun writing that first night, using the careful, precise Japanese script she had learned as a child. Day 1. I am alive. I did not expect to be alive. The Americans have not killed me. They have given me food and a place to sleep. I do not understand. Everything I was taught about Americans is being challenged. I must observe carefully. I must document the truth, whatever it turns out to be. Over the following weeks and months, Sachiko had continued her secret diary. She had written every night, documenting the mundane details of camp life, but also recording her observations about the American guards and staff, about the way prisoners were treated, about the slow unraveling of the propaganda narratives that had shaped her entire worldview. She wrote about the food. Week 2. We are fed 3 times per day. The food is not Japanese. It is strange and sometimes difficult to eat, but it is adequate. I have not been hungry since I arrived. This confuses me. I was told that Americans would starve us, that they believed Japanese people were subhuman and did not deserve to eat. But the portions are the same size as what the American guards eat, sometimes larger. She wrote about medical care. Week 3. I have been examined by an American doctor. She is a woman, which surprised me. She treated me with professional respect. She asked about my medical training and seemed impressed that I had attended nursing school in Tokyo. She offered me a position working in the camp medical facility. I accepted because I need something to do, some purpose beyond just existing. But I am confused. Why would they trust a Japanese prisoner to work in their medical facility? Why would they give me access to medications and supplies? She wrote about the guards. Week 5. The guards rotate shifts. Some are kind, some are distant and professional. None have been cruel. One guard, a young man named James who speaks some Japanese, has begun having conversations with me during meal times. He asks me about Japan, about my family, about my life before the war. He does not ask in the way an interrogator would ask. He asks the way a curious person asks when they want to understand another culture. I do not know what to make of this. She wrote about the small acts of humanity that accumulated day by day. Week 7. It is my birthday today. I did not tell anyone. But somehow James the guard knew. He brought me a small cupcake from the mess hall. He sang a birthday song in English. I did not understand all the words, but I understood the intention. I cried after he left, not from sadness, but from complete confusion about who my enemy is supposed to be. How can someone who remembers my birthday and brings me cake be the monster I was taught Americans were? She wrote about the educational programs. Month 3. The Americans have organized classes, English language instruction, American history and government, vocational training. Attendance is optional, but most prisoners participate because there is little else to do. I am attending the English classes. The teacher is a woman named Margaret who is patient and kind. She does not treat us like we are stupid or inferior. She teaches as if she genuinely wants us to learn, as if our education matters to her. She wrote about news of the war's end. August 15, 1945. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. I should feel devastated. I should feel shame. Instead, I feel relief. The killing is over. No more young men will die. No more cities will be bombed. I am alive and the war is over, and I do not know what comes next, but at least the dying has stopped. She wrote about the complicated process of understanding what Japan had done during the war. Month 5. We have been shown photographs and documents about what the Japanese military did in China, in the Philippines, in other places. The atrocities, the brutality. I did not want to believe it at first, but the evidence is overwhelming. I feel sick. I feel ashamed. How did I not know? How did we not know? Or did we know and chose not to see? I am beginning to understand that I was part of something terrible. Not directly, not intentionally, but I was part of the system that allowed these things to happen. She wrote about the relationships forming between prisoners and guards. Month 6. The boundaries between prisoner and guard are softening, not in a way that compromises security, but in a way that acknowledges our shared humanity. James told me about his family in Iowa, about his father who is a farmer, about his younger sister who wants to be a teacher. He showed me a photograph. His sister looks like she is 16 or 17, around the age my own sister would be now if she survived the bombing of Hiroshima. I do not know if my family is alive. James asked if I wanted to try to contact them through the Red Cross. I said yes. She wrote about the fear of repatriation. Month 8. We will be sent back to Japan soon. I should be happy. I should be eager to return home. But I am afraid. What will I find there? Will my family have survived? Will my city still exist? And more than that, how will I explain what I have learned here? How will I tell other Japanese people that Americans are not monsters, that they treated us with basic human decency even after everything Japan did? Will anyone believe me? Will they think I am a traitor for saying such things? She wrote about specific moments that had changed her understanding. Month 9. Today I was working in the medical facility when an American soldier was brought in with a severe injury from a training accident. I was the only medical personnel available. For a moment I froze. This was an American soldier, the enemy. Everything in my training, everything in my cultural conditioning told me that his pain should bring me satisfaction, that his suffering was just punishment for what America had done to Japan. But when I looked at him, I did not see an enemy. I saw a young man in terrible pain. I saw someone who needed help. I treated him the way I would treat any patient. Afterward, he thanked me. He looked me in the eyes and said thank you. And I realized that this is the truth propaganda tries to hide, that underneath all the uniforms and flags and political rhetoric, we are all just human beings capable of suffering and capable of compassion. She wrote about the church services. Month 10. Some prisoners have begun attending Christian services organized by a chaplain at the camp. I attended out of curiosity. I am Buddhist, but I wanted to understand this American religion. The chaplain spoke about forgiveness and redemption, about how every person has worth regardless of what they have done, about how God loves all people, not just Americans or Christians. After the service, he approached me and asked if I had questions. I asked him if God could forgive Japan for what it had done during the war. He said that forgiveness was always possible for those who genuinely sought it, but that seeking forgiveness required acknowledging what had been done and committing to being different in the future. I have thought about his words every day since then. She wrote about the day she received news from Japan. Month 11. The Red Cross has located my family. They are alive. My parents survived the bombing of Hiroshima. They are living in a refugee camp. My sister is alive but injured. My brother was killed in the war. The news is both joyful and heartbreaking. I will see my family again. But we have lost so much. When I return to Japan, I will be a different person than the woman who left. I will carry with me the knowledge that my enemy showed me more compassion than I had any right to expect. I will carry the burden of knowing that Japan committed terrible acts, and I will carry the hope that reconciliation between our nations is possible if people are willing to see each other as human beings, rather than as abstractions of nationality. The diary continued through Sachiko's final days at the camp and her preparation for repatriation. Her last entry was written the night before she boarded the ship that would take her back to Japan. Final entry. Tomorrow I return to Japan. I am bringing this diary with me hidden in my belongings. I do not know if I will ever share it with anyone. Perhaps it will be too dangerous. Perhaps people will call me a traitor for writing positive things about Americans. But I need to preserve this record. I need to remember the truth of what happened here. That Americans, despite having every reason to hate us, despite everything Japan did during the war, chose to treat us with basic human dignity. They fed us. They housed us. They gave us medical care and education. They helped us contact our families. They showed us that the propaganda was false, that enemies could choose to see each other as human beings. This diary is my testimony. It is the truth that I witnessed, and someday, somehow, I hope it helps people understand that reconciliation is possible, that hatred is a choice, and that we can choose differently. The diary had been confiscated during a routine search of repatriated prisoners' belongings. It had been flagged as potentially containing sensitive information and sent to military intelligence for translation. Helen Yamamoto, the translator, had spent 3 days reading through the entire diary, translating it carefully, noting the progression of Sachiko's thoughts and observations. When she submitted her translation to her superiors, she included a note. "This is not military intelligence," she wrote. "This is the personal testimony of a woman whose entire worldview was challenged and transformed by her experience as a prisoner of war." She documents the effectiveness of treating prisoners humanely. She records the impact of small acts of kindness. This diary is evidence that American values, when actually practiced, can change hearts and minds more effectively than any weapon or propaganda campaign. The diary was filed away in military archives. For decades it remained there, a forgotten document among thousands of others from the war. But in the 1990s, a historian researching the treatment of Japanese prisoners of war discovered the diary and recognized its significance. The historian, Dr. Robert Chen, published excerpts from the diary along with analysis of what it revealed about the prisoner of war experience and the effectiveness of humane treatment of captured enemies. The diary gained attention in both America and Japan. In America, it became cited as evidence that American treatment of prisoners during World War II had been generally humane and had contributed to the successful reconciliation between America and Japan in the post-war period. In Japan, it sparked conversations about how propaganda had distorted Japanese people's understanding of their enemies and how confronting the truth about what Japan had done during the war was essential for moving forward. Sachiko Tanaka herself had returned to Japan in 1946 and had reunited with her surviving family members. She had returned to nursing, working in hospitals that were overwhelmed with patients in the aftermath of the war. She had never spoken publicly about her diary or her experiences as a prisoner of war. She had married, had children, and lived a quiet life, dying in 1998 at the age of 80. But after her death, her family discovered that she had kept the diary hidden in a box of personal papers. They also discovered dozens of letters that she had exchanged over the years with James, the American guard who had brought her a birthday cupcake. The letters revealed a friendship that had lasted decades, maintained through correspondence across the Pacific. James had visited Japan 3 times. Sachiko had visited America twice. They had maintained a connection that had begun in a prisoner of war camp and had survived for over 50 years. When Dr. Chen's book about the diary was published, Sachiko's children agreed to provide additional context. They shared the letters between their mother and James. They shared photographs of their mother's visits to America and James's visits to Japan. They shared stories their mother had told them about her time as a prisoner of war and how it had changed her understanding of the world. One of Sachiko's daughters, Keiko, spoke at a conference about reconciliation and international understanding. She read excerpts from her mother's diary and talked about the impact it had on her own life. "My mother taught me," Keiko said, "that our enemies are created by governments and propaganda, that underneath the political rhetoric and military conflict are just people. People who can be kind or cruel, generous or selfish, but always fundamentally human. She taught me that it is possible to change your mind, to admit you were wrong, to let go of hatred when you are confronted with evidence that challenges your beliefs." That is what her diary represents. The journey from propaganda to truth, from hatred to understanding, from seeing Americans as monsters to seeing them as people. James, who was still alive when the diary was published, traveled to Japan for the book launch. He was 78 years old, a retired farmer from Iowa who had spent his life after the war trying to promote understanding between America and Japan. He spoke at the same conference as Keiko, sharing his memories of Sachiko and the other Japanese prisoners he had guarded. "I remember her birthday," James said to the audience. "I remember thinking that she looked so sad, so far from home. And I thought, what would I want someone to do for me if I was a prisoner far from home on my birthday? I would want someone to remember that I was a person, that my life mattered, that I deserved some small acknowledgement of my existence. So I got her a cupcake. It was nothing. It cost maybe 10 cents. But when I read in her diary years later how much that simple gesture had meant to her, how it had made her question everything she believed about Americans, I realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest impact. The diary was eventually published in full in both Japanese and English. It became required reading in some university courses about World War II, about propaganda and its effects, about the ethics of warfare and the treatment of prisoners. Students read Sachiko's words and were moved by her honesty, by her willingness to question her own beliefs, by her documentation of the slow process of changing one's mind in the face of evidence that contradicts everything one has been taught. The diary revealed several important truths that resonated across cultures and generations. It revealed the power of propaganda to shape beliefs and the power of direct experience to challenge those beliefs. It revealed that treating prisoners humanely was not just ethically correct, but strategically effective in building the foundation for post-war peace. It revealed that individual acts of kindness, like bringing someone a birthday cupcake or helping them contact their family, could have profound impacts that rippled outward for decades. But perhaps most importantly, the diary revealed the internal struggle of a person forced to confront the gap between what they had been taught and what they were experiencing. Sachiko had not simply flipped from believing propaganda to rejecting it overnight. Her diary documented a gradual process of questioning, observing, processing, and ultimately accepting a new understanding of reality. It was a deeply human document that captured the psychological and emotional work required to change one's mind about fundamental beliefs. The legacy of Sachiko's secret diary extended beyond the book and the conferences and the academic discussions. It inspired other people to share their own stories of having their beliefs challenged, of having to confront uncomfortable truths, of learning to see former enemies as human beings. Veterans from various conflicts wrote about their experiences. Refugees and immigrants shared their stories of cultural adjustment and changing perspectives. The diary became a symbol of the possibility of personal transformation and the importance of remaining open to new evidence even when it contradicts cherished beliefs. Today, the original diary is preserved in a museum in Tokyo, dedicated to peace and reconciliation. Visitors can see the small notebook with its careful Japanese script. They can read translations of selected entries. They can see the photographs of Sachiko and James, of the letters they exchanged, of the friendship that grew from that initial encounter in a prisoner of war camp. The exhibit includes a statement written by Sachiko's family. "Our mother hid this diary," the statement reads, "not because she was ashamed of what she had written, but because she was afraid that the truth she had documented would be dangerous in the immediate aftermath of the war. She was afraid that admitting Americans had treated her well would be seen as betrayal of Japan. But she kept the diary because she believed that someday the truth would matter, that someday people would need to understand what really happened, not what propaganda claimed happened." She was right. The truth does matter. And her diary stands as testimony to the power of truth to overcome hatred and to build bridges between former enemies. That is the legacy of the secret diary of Sachiko Tanaka, the Japanese prisoner of war nurse who documented her transformation from believing Americans were demons to understanding that they were people capable of compassion and mercy. Her words, written in hiding during her captivity, became a powerful tool for promoting reconciliation and understanding between nations. Her honesty about her own journey from propaganda to truth inspired others to examine their own beliefs and to remain open to the possibility that what they had been taught might not be entirely accurate. The diary revealed a truth that every generation needs to learn: that our enemies are often not what we have been told they are, that propaganda works by preventing us from seeing the humanity in other people, and that when we are confronted with evidence that challenges our beliefs, we have a choice. We can cling to what we have been taught, or we can have the courage to change our minds. Sachiko Tanaka chose courage, She chose truth, and her secret diary became a gift to future generations, a reminder that even in the midst of the most terrible conflicts, it is possible to see past the hatred and recognize our shared humanity.